Edmonton, Alberta, definitely a city of contrasts, home of some of the most egregious car-oriented land uses, including the biggest shopping mall in North America. Well, sort of. I'll talk all about it when we get there. But also the birthplace of light rail transit as we know it, and it's a city with a burgeoning bike network that's going through the usual political battles. In other words, Edmonton is a microcosm of the contradictions and conflicts a lot of North American cities are working through as they try to improve the urban realm. As always, this won't be a comprehensive overview of the city because I only had a few days to visit. Instead, I'm going to focus on the things that I thought were interesting and important from the perspective of someone with a lengthy career in urban planning and transportation engineering. I do have to talk about transit from the airport. I made myself do it because that's the kind of channel this is, but it is not a one-seat ride to downtown Edmonton. First of all, the airport is way outside the city, to the south. You have to catch Route 747 to Century Park on the edge of the city and transfer to light rail to get downtown. The bus does get stuck in traffic and it runs every 30 minutes, if you're lucky. Well, apparently I got super lucky both directions and I only had to wait like 5 to 10 minutes. And then the trains from Century Park usually run every 5 minutes. By the way, does Boeing pay a placement fee of some kind for this? Because this is not the first 747 designation I've seen on an airport route. Century Park is the southern terminus of the city's light rail system, or what they just call LRT, and let's talk about it. So here are some things you might not know about Edmonton's LRT, and since most of my viewers are in the US, I'm gonna put this in a US context. If it was a US city, which I do not wish on Edmonton at all right now, it would rank third in light rail ridership, just behind LA and San Diego, and ahead of Seattle, San Francisco, and Boston. Note that all 5 of those cities are much larger than Edmonton. In fact, if we look at Canadian metro areas, Edmonton is number 6, but really it's in a tight cluster with numbers 4 and 5, Ottawa and Calgary, around 1.4 to 1.5 million. In fact, if they were US metro areas, those 3 would stay in a cluster, ranking between number 42 Oklahoma City and number 43 Louisville. Oklahoma City is kind of an interesting comparison. It's the same size, it's the capital city of a prairie state, or province. The local economy is highly dependent on energy and resource extraction. You might guess it would be culturally similar, but in terms of transit, Oklahoma City's system had a ridership of 750,000 in the first quarter of 2025, and Edmonton did 26 million. There's a lot more of the story, but just look at rail. OKC has one rail line, a downtown streetcar circulator that runs like every 15 minutes. Edmonton's light rail system, though, it's a whole saga. When it opened in 1978, it was the first modern, newly constructed light rail service in North America, predating the first system in the US, San Diego, by 3 years. So the longevity of the system goes some way to explaining the high ridership, but here's some things I didn't realize until I got here. First, the core of the system, the Capital and Metro lines, are below grade between the north end of downtown through the University of Alberta stations on the south side of the North Saskatchewan River. So that helps with speed and reliability. Also, in the core of the system, frequency varies, but for a lot of trips at a lot of times of day, you're looking at 5-minute headways. Now, a lot of the original system does still have a 1978 feel to it, like we're at the tail end of the disco era, which as a tourist I kind of enjoyed, but there's no doubt the downtown stations in particular need a refresh. They're a bit gloomy, the entrances seem undersized, there are some dark corridors. Not sure what the plan is here. Enlighten me down in the comments. The city has upgraded some of its original legacy stations, though. The Capital Line opened in 1978 in conjunction with Edmonton hosting the Commonwealth Games, and the station at Commonwealth Stadium, currently home of the CFL Elks and the largest stadium in Canada, was renovated in 2022 and gives you a sense of the less claustrophobic way the city is currently trying to build stations. Also, lots of new transit-oriented development going in at stadium yards, so you can really see how the investments from decades ago are paying dividends over time, accommodating growth as the city continues to attract new residents. I'll come back and talk about the Metro line in a bit, but let's go to the Valley line, which opened in 2023. Tunneling is expensive, so the Valley Line runs at grade, even downtown, and then out to the southeast. The station design is kind of more reminiscent of the Green Line in Minneapolis-St. Paul, with spaces on the platform to protect you from the elements, which is important in this part of the world when it isn't July. And the network is still building out. You can see the West Valley Line under construction. It's gonna run at grade, extending the existing Valley Line west of downtown through some of the city's densest neighborhoods. The last two stations on the West Valley alignment are gonna be elevated because now we're basically at the destination, West Edmonton Mall, or I think we're just calling it WEM. Anyway, like any far-flung shopping mall that's worth anything, it's surrounded by just massive stroads with ungodly signalized intersections where decision makers decided it was well worth spending hundreds of millions to run the service grade separated. So look, we have to talk about WEM, but one key thing is it is a huge trip generator in the region for retail, entertainment, and definitely employment. There's a ton of transit out here today, and the West Valley Line, which will terminate on the south side of the mall, is going to replace a ton of bus trips that currently go to the transit center on the north side of the mall. Okay, so I want to call WEM the largest mall in North America. I believe the Mall of America in Minnesota is larger by floor area, but by number of individual storefronts, WEM is the largest in the entire Western Hemisphere by a good margin. And the question you might ask right now is, why Edmonton? Well, the official story is land was cheap in the 1970s, the local economy was booming because of global oil prices, and the developers, who are Edmonton locals, had a vision of creating a massive indoor urban bazaar, reminiscent of the ones in Iran where they emigrated from. And it has been very successful. I didn't see a single empty storefront while I was here, except for the Hudson's Bay department store, which is a whole other topic, and WEM was hopping the day I went there. So my theory is, it's no coincidence that the most grandiose examples of simulated urbanism on our continent are in two of the metro areas, Edmonton and the Twin Cities, where it gets the coldest, but it was a beautiful summer day outside and it was still busy. Also, I just have to share this. The first night I got to Edmonton, I was hanging out with some of the people from the groups that had pooled resources together to bring me out. They had all kinds of suggestions for places I should go and film while I was in Edmonton, and not one of them suggested I go to WEM, which I sort of get. It isn't really what they wanted me to talk about, but what you might not realize is that malls are part of my urbanist origin story. When I was a kid, I loved going to suburban malls because you could walk to everything. There was tons of people watching. The density of food and entertainment options couldn't be beat. It's a lot of the reason that as I grew up, I realized that what I really loved was dense cities. Let's talk about the mall itself. Not sprawling and labyrinthine like I was expecting. It's actually very linear, like a conventional mall. It's just that it's linear at a much, much larger scale. The entrance numbering system is one clue, but also, instead of just having one Lids, one Orange Julius, and one La Vie and Rose, Canada's finest purveyor of intimate wear, it has multiples of each. And then when I say it's just a really big mall, that's not really true because there's just an absurd amount of other stuff going on. A full-sized ice rink because this is Canada, a quality gaming establishment, not only a conventional 18-hole mini golf course, but blacklight mini golf, virtual reality stuff, a dinner theater, souped-up go-karts. More importantly, the world's largest indoor lake, Deep Sea Adventure Lake, where you can rent space on a life-size replica of the Santa Maria and have pirate-themed parties, and World Water Park, home of the world's largest indoor wave pool. Had enough superlatives yet? Because I'm not done. An indoor amusement park, Galaxyland, where they're trying to leverage Hasbro IP into thrill rides. I don't know if it's doing it for me. The Monopoly train, a Chutes and Ladders kids play area, sorry bumper cars, the Cootie coaster. It's all just a lot, and there's a hotel with individually themed rooms. The whole thing is kind of like the Great Wolf Lodge on roids. Also, WEM features over 100 different eating establishments. They've got cheesecake, and they've got a factory. Edmonton, you're just so close to getting it. Okay, even though I dispute the idea that malls aren't real urbanism, I'm gonna move on because we aren't quite done exploring the city's LRT network. We're going out to the end of the Metro line, Blatchford Market, a newer station that dates from 2015. And what makes this one interesting is the station area. It used to be a municipal airport, but the city is in the process of redeveloping the entire site, creating a new urban neighborhood from whole cloth. It's barely taken shape at this point, but I really like going to these kinds of locations because it gives you a peek into what the city actually wants to see in the urban environment when they have a blank canvas to work with. Like, if they were starting from scratch with no space constraints, what kind of streets would they be building? Because what's taking shape in Blatchford is very, very encouraging. You just wish it didn't require decommissioning a whole airport to get cities to allocate space this way. Okay, I want to talk about walking and biking in Edmonton, and you can't really do that without talking about the River Valley. If you haven't been to Edmonton, you may be asking, what is the River Valley? It's a stretch of urban parkland along both sides of the North Saskatchewan River through the center of the city, and I've been assured by the city's tourism website, as well as several locals I talked to, that it is the largest stretch of urban parkland in North America, and 22 times the size of Central Park. The comparison's a bit apples and oranges, but the River Valley is amazing, and the pride Edmontonians have in it is completely understandable. And the River Valley doesn't exist by accident. A lot of this land was occupied by mining and industry in the 19th and early 20th century, and that's when the city made the decision to start acquiring parcels all over the valley. There were lots of reasons for this, but primarily they wanted to create a place where people could get away from the city without leaving the city, which is something the world's great urban parks do really well. The River Valley has survived a lot of threats, including plans in the 1960s to drive freeways through it. Edmontonians revolted, and today the River Valley enjoys fairly strong legal protections, and not only has massive recreational value, but it's a source of local biodiversity and maybe the lungs of the city as well. So you can come to Edmonton to experience some amazing simulated urbanism, but you should probably come for the River Valley. I almost want to call it non-simulated, non-urbanism, but I don't want to suggest that having great natural spaces in your city isn't urbanist, because I think it very much is. One of my core things is we need to let cities be cities so the wilderness can be the wilderness. And I usually mean that in terms of like an urban growth boundary that protects forest and farmland, but that kind of dynamic can even play out right in the heart of the city. Quick note on where I stayed while I was here: the Riverdale neighborhood, which is downtown adjacent but also down in the River Valley and feels light years away from the city. Shout out to this place where my sponsors put me up in an upstairs loft. The Wayne Gretzky unit apparently wasn't available, so I made do with the Connor McDavid. Can't complain, beautiful spot, and thanks so much to the great staff at Dogpatch and the River Valley Company for making me feel at home. So there are tough barriers for getting any kind of development or public works project approved in the River Valley, but bridges seem to be a notable exception. This includes the new Walterdale, which is a replacement bridge that dates from 2017 and has a really nicely done bike ped connection. But the newer bridges were permitted, I think, because they carry LRT, which was seen as a regional necessity. The Tawatna Bridge, which carries the Valley Line LRT, opened in 2021, not without controversy, I believe, as the project had a lot of impact on natural areas, but it is gorgeous. I used the lower deck quite a few times, and it seems to be a popular addition to the ped bike network. And the Menzies LRT Bridge, which dates from 1992 when the light rail first extended south of the river, also has a lower deck that connects to the River Valley Trail system. But I think it's the high-level bridge right next door that carries the most bike ped traffic over the North Saskatchewan. Much older, and besides being kind of spectacular and giving you amazing views as you cross, it is what it says it is. It's high level, meaning it bypasses the River Valley altogether, connecting you right into the street grid near downtown on the north side and into the Garneau neighborhood on the south side. Garneau, or maybe it's the Garneau, is as good a spot as any to launch into the topic of biking in Edmonton more generally. If you're in the inner neighborhoods of this city, say within 5 kilometers of downtown, the bike infrastructure is mostly well connected and it's pretty high quality, particularly the newer stuff, which is usually two-way protected bike lanes on relatively quiet, low traffic streets like here on 110th. I did get around primarily by e-bike while I was here, thanks to Pedigo for donating the rental for a couple days. I'm not really an e-bike person. I mean, half the time I feel like the only reason I need a pedal assist is because the battery itself is so freaking heavy. But you do have to deal with some hills getting in and out of the river valley, so on the whole, it was a plus. Their shop is located in the Strathcona neighborhood next door to Garneau, and originally an independent city but absorbed by Edmonton in 1912. Right now I'm showing you 83rd Avenue, which runs east-west from the Garneau through Strathcona, and again, I don't know what the bike counts are, but my definition of a good bike city is one where you get slowed down in bike congestion. It's really the opposite psychology of driving a car. Also, I don't think Strathcona is the densest neighborhood in Edmonton, but there's a ton of multifamily along 83rd that I'm sure generates travel demand on the corridor. And maybe more important, it runs parallel and just 2 blocks north of Strathcona's High Street, White Avenue. White Avenue itself, I certainly wouldn't call it a stroad. The pedestrian environment has a streetcar suburb feel to it, but there's no doubt the roadway cross-section heavily favors driving. I've heard rumors that the city is looking at some cross-section changes in transit priority. It does often feel as if the pedestrian realm is a bit constrained. Related, the city has an interesting approach to street seating where instead of having the restaurant put extra seating in the on-street parking zone and having a pedestrian zone pass in between, they use practically the whole sidewalk for seating and then push the pedestrian zone out into the street. I'm not pro or anti necessarily, but I do think it's interesting. Also, way more pedestrian scrambles than I was expecting, and you'll see them up and down White Avenue and downtown. Oh, also home of the old South Edmonton Station, once the northern terminus of the Calgary and Edmonton Railway. Bring it back. The key thing is, though, all this nice bike infrastructure in the inner neighborhoods, like Westmount on the north side of the river, is really well connected. The wayfinding is solid, the facilities are high quality, there's density and mixed use. The bike network even has a great connection to this pitch-perfect replica of Amsterdam. Actually, probably better than the real thing. I mean, if this was Amsterdam, you wouldn't be able to park anywhere. Checkmate, the Netherlands. Every neighborhood isn't that well connected though. This is 132nd Avenue in North Edmonton, the city's newest protected bikeway, and only a single long disconnected segment has been completed so far. Pretty phenomenal facility, especially when you consider what the sections of 132nd look like that haven't been retrofitted yet, but not much bike activity yet because the whole corridor isn't complete and you don't have any network effects. But this is ground zero for the city's bike lane wars, which seem to go exactly like every other city's. I can never understand how there are people who really prefer this when the city is offering you this. Edmonton has the same dynamic a lot of cities have. Nice, walkable, bikeable streetscapes in expensive inner neighborhoods, and godforsaken, car-dependent stroads everywhere else. What's really salient to me is this part of Edmonton is more affordable. It is where a lot of the city's immigrant population lands when they come here, and the built environment of the place where they land has such a dramatic influence on the behaviors and the transportation culture they adopt. Wouldn't we rather that they didn't come here and immediately imprint the worst transportation habits North America has to offer? Just something to think about. Okay, I often start with downtown on these city visit videos, but today I'm saving it for last. You're just gonna have to trust me on this. Brief reminder to do all the things that help boost the discoverability of this content, if for no other reason than there isn't nearly enough West Edmonton Mall discourse in my social media feed, and that needs to change. Also, a huge thanks to Paths for People, Bike Edmonton, Edmonton Transit Riders, and all the local folks who've figured out how to get me up to the Canadian prairie. We had a phenomenal turnout at our event at the University of Alberta. I believe over 300 folks, all in the same room to talk about the things that make Edmonton great and all the things we can all be doing better. And special acknowledgement to Paths for People who really led this whole effort. They do lots of good advocacy work to fight for better walking, biking, and rolling infrastructure and policies in Edmonton. So if you have the wherewithal, donations are great, and volunteering, maybe even better. Link down in the description. Again, pretty inspirational event, and as an outsider, the key piece of information that I gleaned from the event was that Calgary sucks. Just FYI, historically I've gotten like twice as many views from Calgary as I have from Edmonton, so make of that what you will. You all can fight it out down in the comments. And before we get back to it, a live show with the War on Cars in Seattle, November 5th. Tickets now open to the general public and still available at time of taping. Maybe not by the time this is released, we'll see. Also, link down in the description. Before we get downtown, one more stop south of the river, Happy Beer Street, which is the actual name of an actual corridor in the Ritchie neighborhood. Happy Beer Street sounds redundant, but you might not be that enthused over the actual pedestrian environment on 99th Street itself. Most of the action is actually in an evolving industrial environment in the block or so between 99th and the Strathcona rail yards. There are several craft breweries. It is bikeable using the back streets just off White Avenue, so recommended if you're someone who partakes. Okay, let's go downtown. One thing I really had trouble wrapping my head around was that the 0 point of the city is 100th Street and 100th Avenue, a situation that's summed up pretty well by this very Canadian headline. Edmonton city planners admit roads are somewhat confusing. I guess the theory was that if they started at 100 and worked their way out from there, they'd never run out of streets. Oh, how they were deceived. Anyway, now all the streets have to be designated northwest because they eventually trapped themselves into having the origin point be way out in the southeast corner of the city's beltway. Anyway, downtown Edmonton is fine. It's like a lot of the cities I visit, just not nearly as interesting as what's going on out in the neighborhoods. No freeways though, so that's a plus, and there's good bike infrastructure and some good pedestrian-oriented spots like Rice Howard Way and 104th Street, or maybe they decided it's easier to just call it 4th Street. And if you walk all the way up 104th, you will get to the Ice District, an entertainment zone that's organized around Rogers Place, home of the city's sole Big Four sports franchise, the Edmonton Oilers. And this is probably where I felt the most tension between what Edmonton is, what it has been, and what it wants to be. Because in the Ice District, you will not be allowed to forget that this is oil country. Black gold is the source of so much of Edmonton's wealth, and it creates a bit of a conundrum. Is embracing walking, biking, and transit in the province of Alberta an act of sacrilege? Is disavowing car culture like turning your back on your very birthright? Let's go back to WEM and wrap this up. Deep in the heart of the mall, there's a sculpture that pays tribute to oil workers, which I get. It's clearly part of the city's identity. But it wasn't until I got up to the upper level that I was able to take in the whole thing, which includes what I think are glass-blown drops of oil raining down from the sky. Just interesting symbolism from the place that also apparently boasts the world's largest parking lot. And that isn't even the last WEM superlative. There were not one, but two car dealerships in the mall itself, including West Edmonton Mall Toyota, the world's largest full-service in-mall dealership. You know, when I was having lunch at the mall, my server asked me what I was doing in town, and I said, doing a talk about cities and transportation at the university. And she said, oh, you mean like 15-minute cities? Because I'm in favor. And I said, well, this mall is kind of like a 15-minute city all by itself. And, well, she disagreed. So I actually enjoyed my time at WEM, but not as much as I enjoyed all the great neighborhoods in Edmonton, and especially all the ways you could get between them without a car. And what I realized the more Edmontonians I talked to was a lot more people agree with me than I thought. Even, and maybe especially, people have to work out at the mall. And that's all I got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons. Your direct support really helps me help the communities that are doing great work in cities all over North America. All I ask in return is that you roll some quality swag into the speakers agreement, and no, I cannot be seen wearing Oilers gear, but thanks Edmonton, it was a blast. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.